The kitchen smelled faintly of burnt coffee and fryer grease, a scent that clung to the walls no matter how much soap you used. Under the pale hum of flickering fluorescent lights, Nick, his apron stiff with stains from 100 hurried meals, scrubbed another plate clean. Steam curled up from the industrial sink, fogging his glasses and softening the edges of everything around him. Like the world itself was weary at this hour. It was nearly 3 in the morning, a time when most places were silent. But Murphy's diner had its own rhythm, one that never truly stopped. The distant clatter of dishes mingled with the low growl of the old coffee machine, as if the building's tired bones refused to give in to the night. For the past 3 weeks, Nick had been part of this after-hours heartbeat, learning quickly that the diner didn't just serve food. It fed people who were running on hope, habit, or pure exhaustion. Truckers seeking warmth in a bowl of chili. Factory workers grabbing one last cup of coffee before the morning shift swallowed them whole. From the cracked vinyl booths to the linoleum floors permanently darkened by years of foot traffic, Murphy's wasn't pretty. The neon sign outside stuttered between open and op. Yet somehow customers kept coming. They didn't know the truth about the man behind the sink. Nobody did. The man scrubbing their plates wasn't just another night shift hire. He was the owner, not just of this diner, but of 47 others across the country. His real name was Noah Caldwell, a man who had built an empire from nothing. Just a battered food truck in Chicago 20 years ago, and the stubborn refusal to quit. At 45, he had more money than he could have imagined as a younger man, but the boardroom had pulled him far from the counter. Numbers told him which locations thrived and which were bleeding out, but numbers didn't tell him why. Somewhere along the way, he'd lost touch with the pulse of his own creation. Murphy's diner, one of his weakest performers, was bleeding badly. Revenue was down 18%, complaints were stacking up, and employees quit faster than they were replaced. His district manager told him to shut it down, but instead of giving the order, Noah, now Nick, chose something he had never done before. He went undercover. It wasn't hard to disappear into a new identity. A fake social security number, thrift store clothes that smelled faintly of someone else's life, and a story about losing his job at a factory were enough. Desperation spoke louder than credentials. Dale, the manager, hired him without so much as a second glance. No paperwork, no background check. Just an unspoken agreement. Work the graveyard shift, don't complain, take minimum wage. 3 weeks in, Nick understood exactly why the diner was sinking. Dale spent more time in his office playing solitaire than managing the floor. The day shift cook smelled of whiskey before noon. The freezer door wouldn't stay shut, and the coffee machine coughed more than it brewed. Still, these were fixable problems. What unsettled him was something harder to name, something that began and ended with Lena. Lena Martinez was in her early 30s, with tired eyes that still managed to soften when she spoke to customers. Her hands moved with the precision of someone who had done this work long enough to make it muscle memory. Pouring coffee, sliding plates, catching a customer's mood before they said a word. She remembered the little things. The trucker who liked his eggs over easy with coffee as black as midnight. The diabetic factory worker who ordered pie just to taste it, even though 2 bites were all his medication allowed. She even kept a folded stack of local job listings under the register for customers looking for a fresh start. But then there was her habit. Around 2:30 a.m., when the last customer was gone and Dale had disappeared into his office, Lena would begin her closing routine, wiping tables, refilling napkins, counting the register. It was all ordinary until it wasn't. Nick had seen her pull a small bundle of cash from her apron pocket, glance around, and slip into the kitchen's far corner. Behind the wheezing old freezer, hidden from casual view, was a mason jar. She'd dropped the bills inside. The first time, Nick told himself it was harmless. Maybe she didn't trust banks. Maybe she was saving for something personal. But as the nights went by, the pattern shifted. She wasn't just tucking away her tips. Some nights, a $5 bill from the register would vanish into that jar. Other nights, it was 10. Not enough to scream theft, but enough to matter to the people who worked here. And Nick noticed everything. Tonight, as he dried the last dinner plate, he watched Lena through the pass-through window. She moved with her usual quiet focus, humming under her breath, unaware of his gaze. In a few minutes, she'd walk toward that freezer again. And he'd have to decide, act on what he'd seen, or stay silent. The choice sat heavy in his chest. Lena had been nothing but good to him. On his first night, when he'd fumbled with the dishwasher like it was a puzzle built to humiliate him, she had stepped in with gentle guidance. She taught him how to stack the racks, which soap could cut the stubborn grease, and how to coax the ancient machine into working when it threatened to quit. She brought him coffee during breaks, made space for him at the counter, never laughed when he asked the same question twice. But kindness didn't erase the truth. If she was taking from the register, she wasn't just stealing from him. She was taking from Maria, the single mother who dragged herself through double shifts on weekends, and Tommy, the college kid whose textbooks cost more than his paycheck. Noah's mother had worked in diners like this. She'd told him stories about the kind of managers who turned a blind eye when tips went missing, and about the way staff were treated like spare parts, replaceable, forgettable. He had built his business to be the opposite of that, and now, here he was, watching the same thing he had sworn to prevent, wondering if confronting Lena would be an act of justice, or a mistake that would break something far more fragile than a rule. Lena's voice broke through Nick's thoughts like a hand tapping his shoulder. "Hey, Nick." He turned toward the doorway, finding her leaning casually against the frame, order pad tucked neatly into her apron. Her eyes swept over his face, searching for something. "You okay? You look like you're wrestling with something heavy." "Just tired," he lied, hanging the dish towel on its hook. "Long shift." She gave a small, knowing nod. "Tell me about it. Some nights I feel like I could sleep standing up." She hesitated, studying him a moment longer. "You sure you're all right? You've seemed a little, I don't know, distant lately." Her concern landed heavier than it should have, twisting the guilt already lodged in his chest. Here she was, checking on him, while he was preparing to watch her every move, to catch her in an act that could destroy her career. "I'm fine," he said again, forcing a smile he didn't feel. "This place, these people, they grow on you," she said softly. "After a while, they become family. Even when things are tough, even when it feels like nobody cares, there's always someone here who needs what you can give." Her words hit him like a sharp jab to the ribs. She was speaking about family while possibly betraying that very family. The contradiction made his stomach tighten. As Lena turned back to her closing duties, Nick made up his mind. Tomorrow night, he'd stay late. He would watch her routine closely, document exactly what she took and from where. He'd give her a chance to explain herself before deciding whether to call the police. She'd been kind to him since his first day. She deserved at least that. If she was stealing, he'd let her resign quietly rather than drag her through charges. But as he untied his apron and stepped toward the back door, her words echoed again. "There's always someone here who needs what you can give. What if he was wrong? What if something else was going on?" He shook his head, forcing the doubt away. Numbers didn't lie. Money was missing, and she had both the access and the opportunity. Whatever the reason, theft was theft. Tomorrow night, he'd find out. His beat-up Honda Civic waited under the yellow wash of the parking lot light, another part of his dishwasher disguise. He didn't see Lena at the diner's front window, watching him go. Her face was shadowed, almost worried, as she clutched a small slip of paper with a phone number and a single word, written in neat, careful letters. Rico. Nick arrived at Murphy's the next evening with a plan. That day, he'd stepped out of his cover identity and back into his real life. A few quiet calls to his IT department had unlocked remote access to the diner's point-of-sale records, security logs, and employee files. If Lena was stealing, the numbers would confirm it. The data painted a troubling picture. For the past 6 weeks, exactly the period she'd been working the graveyard shift, cash deposits had been short almost every night she closed alone. The shortages were small, usually between $8 and $15, but they formed a consistent pattern. Even more telling, her reported tips were lower than other servers with the same traffic. Either she had extraordinary bad luck, or she was pocketing money before it hit the system. The grainy security footage told its own story. The outdated cameras couldn't catch every detail, but the routine was clear. She'd finish cleaning, count the till, then vanish into the freezer's blind spot. Minutes later, she'd reappear empty-handed and slip out the back door. "You're early tonight," Dale said as Nick clocked in. The manager barely glanced up from his crossword puzzle, his desk littered with energy drink cans and fast food wrappers. "Lena's already got the coffee going." Nick nodded, walking into the kitchen with deliberate calm. Lena was tying her apron, chatting with a lanky teenager Nick recognized as Rico, the busboy. "Don't worry about it," Lena was telling him, her tone both firm and gentle. "Just focus on getting better. The rest will work itself out." Nick studied the boy. The exhaustion on his face was far too deep for 15. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his uniform hung loose, as if he'd lost weight. "Thanks, Lena," Rico murmured. "I don't know what we'd do without you." She ruffled his hair in a gesture that felt protective, almost sisterly. "You just take care of yourself. That's what matters." As Rico left to set tables, Nick poured himself coffee, trying to sound casual. "That kid seems pretty young to be working nights." Lena's eyes sharpened, her voice taking on a protective edge. "Rico's a good kid. He's helping his family. You're not going to say anything to Dale, are you? He needs this job." No, Nick replied quickly. "Just making conversation." But her reaction told him something important. She cared about the boy. Maybe enough to break rules, maybe enough to take money. The dinner rush was busier than usual, giving Nick plenty of chances to watch her work. She moved through her section like a conductor guiding an orchestra. Orders remembered without notes. Customers tended to before they had to ask. She was without question one of the best waitresses he'd seen, but even the best could make bad choices. Around midnight, as the crowd thinned, he tested the waters. Carrying a tub of dirty dishes, he asked, "You always stay this late?" "Most of the others are out by 11:30. "Someone has to settle the till properly," she said, refilling sugar dispensers. Her tone was casual, but her eyes flicked toward him. "Dale's not exactly detail-oriented, if you know what I mean. Settling the till could mean balancing it, or skimming it." "Must be frustrating," Nick said, "working so hard while management doesn't pull their weight." "That's life," she answered, a faint edge in her voice. "Some people get lucky, some people don't. The rest of us just do what we have to do." An hour later, Nick was loading glasses into the dishwasher when Kevin, Dale's assistant manager, wandered into the kitchen. He usually left before the quiet hours, but tonight he lingered, grabbing a soda from the walk-in cooler. "That Lena," Kevin said, shaking his head. "Good heart, but she's always got her hand in something." Nick's pulse spiked. "What do you mean?" Kevin lowered his voice, glancing toward the dining room. "She works hard, no doubt, but I've seen her keep some change, tips, register, whatever. Dale lets it slide because she's reliable. Just saying, if I were you, I'd count my till twice when she's around." The words hit Nick like a cold slap. Another employee, no reason to lie, saying exactly what he'd feared. If Kevin was right, it wasn't suspicion anymore. It was fact. That night, driving away from Murphy's in the battered Honda that was part of his disguise, Nick shed the role of Nick Torres and stepped silently back into his real life. In the underground garage of his high-rise, his luxury sedan sat gleaming under perfect lighting, a stark reminder of the two worlds he straddled. The contrast made him think of his mother. Rosa Caldwell had spent most of her adult life in places like Murphy's, small diners where the smell of grease clung to her clothes long after she got home, where the floors were sticky, The tips were unpredictable, and respect was a luxury no one could afford. She'd told him stories about managers who skimmed from the tip pool, co-workers who stole from each other, and customers who walked out without paying. He remembered the way she'd soak her swollen feet at the end of a double shift, the lines in her back etched deeper with every year, while people who'd never scrubbed a plate or lifted a tray profited from her labor. One evening, not long before cancer took her, she'd gripped his hand with surprising strength. "Promise me something, mijo," she'd said. "If you ever get the chance to be the boss, be better than the ones I had to work for. Protect people like me." For Noah Caldwell, building his restaurant empire had never been just about money. Every benefit package, every promotion, every policy designed to treat employees with dignity had been his silent vow to keep that promise. But now, one of the very people he believed he was protecting was stealing from the co-workers who trusted her. That night, lying in his king-sized bed with the city, lights spilling across the ceiling, he couldn't sleep. His mind spun through the possibilities, replaying every glance, every word Lena had spoken to him. Tomorrow night, he would confront her. He'd listen, give her the chance to explain. If she was in trouble, maybe he could help. But if she couldn't give him a reason that justified what she was doing, he would have to let her go. It would hurt, but his mother's voice echoed too clearly to ignore. Protect people like me, even from each other. By the next evening, the waiting was unbearable. He needed answers, and he needed them now. Whatever Lena's story was, tonight he would find out. The kitchen clock read 2:58 a.m. when the soft thud of the back door closing drew his eyes to the window. In the faint glow of the alley's security light, Lena's silhouette moved quickly, almost furtively, away from the diner. His pulse quickened. This was it. He'd been watching her all night, his nerves strung tight. Every time she smiled or asked if he needed a refill on coffee, guilt had twisted in him, but Kevin's words wouldn't stop repeating. She keeps some of the change. Tonight, the routine had played out as always. Cleaning, counting the register, disappearing into the blind spot behind the freezer. But this time, she hadn't left empty-handed. She'd taken something from her hiding place and slipped out the back door. He waited 30 seconds before following her. The Detroit winter slapped him in the face, the icy air burning his lungs. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he moved into the narrow alley between the diner and the auto parts store next door. Harsh security light painted jagged shadows on the brick walls, and the wind carried the mixed scent of frying oil and exhaust from the nearby highway. She was there, sitting on an overturned milk crate beside the dumpster, hunched over something in her lap. Her breath came in quick clouds as her fingers worked methodically, her voice a low murmur he couldn't make out. She didn't hear him, until his foot slipped on a patch of ice and scraped against the brick. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with terror. In her hands was the mason jar, stuffed with crumpled bills and coins. A few coins spilled onto the icy pavement as she clutched the jar to her chest like it was oxygen. "Nick," she gasped, her voice ragged. I didn't hear you." They stared at each other, the bitter wind whipping between them. Her face was pale, lips chapped, shoulders drawn tight inside her coat. But it wasn't guilt in her eyes. It was raw, unguarded fear. The kind you see in someone who knows they're about to lose the last thing that matters. "Please," she said, and her voice cracked. "Please don't take this away. I'm almost there." The speech he'd prepared, the one about trust, responsibility, and theft, died in his throat. This wasn't the defensive denial or angry defiance he'd expected. This was something else. "Take what away?" he asked, though some part of him already knew he wasn't ready for the answer. Tears welled in her eyes and froze as they slid down her cheeks. She looked from the jar to him, and something in her broke open. "Rico's treatment," she whispered. "He's only 15, and he has leukemia." The words punched the air from his lungs. "His mom, Maria, she works double shifts at the factory," Lena continued, her voice trembling but gathering urgency. Insurance won't cover the new treatment. They need $18,000 up front. He's getting worse, Nick. If they don't start soon. Her voice trailed off, the end of the sentence too heavy to speak. She held up the jar with both hands. I've been saving every tip. Some nights I put in my own money from home. When tips are low, I take a few dollars from the register and replace it with my paycheck later. He stared at her. You're not stealing, he said quietly, almost like a prayer. You're trying to save his life. I know how it looks, Lena rushed on. I know taking from the register is wrong, even if I put it back, but he doesn't have the time for me to do this the right way. She opened the jar, her hands shaking, and began counting with the precision of someone who had done it 100 times. $347.32, she murmured. I need $400 more to make this month's payment. And suddenly, everything he'd seen these past weeks made sense. Her protectiveness when he'd asked about Rico working nights, the boy's exhaustion, the weight loss, her quiet generosity toward customers. She wasn't a thief. She was a soldier fighting a private war in the shadows. Why didn't you tell anyone? He asked, shame tightening his voice. Who was I going to tell? Dale? Kevin? They can barely keep the lights on here. She swiped her sleeve across her face. This isn't about me getting credit. It's about Rico getting better. That's all that matters. But you're working yourself to the bone, Nick said, his throat tight. You're giving away your own money, risking your job. He's 15, she repeated simply, as if that was reason enough. And maybe it was. They sat in silence, the hum of the highway mixing with the whistle of wind through the alley. Nick felt smaller than he had in years. For 3 weeks, he'd doubted her. While she'd been pulling off quiet miracles with pocket change, he'd been preparing to accuse her of betrayal. I'm sorry, he said finally, the words feeling far too light for the weight of his regret. Lena's brows knit in confusion. Sorry? For what? Sorry for what? Lena's voice was soft, but it carried in the stillness of the alley. For doubting you, Nick said. For thinking... The words caught in his throat. Shame pressed down on him, making it impossible to finish. He didn't need to. She seemed to understand, her expression softening, and for the first time since he'd stepped outside, a hint of a smile touched her lips. It's okay, she murmured. I know how it must look. If I were you, I'd probably think the same thing. But that was the problem, Nick realized. She wouldn't think the same thing. Lena saw the best in people, always, while he had been trained to search for the worst. And there, in a freezing alley behind a struggling diner, surrounded by coins scattered across ice and the bitter smell of garbage, something in him shifted. He'd come here to catch a thief. Instead, he'd found a hero. Sleep eluded him for the next 3 nights. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, shivering in the dark, counting coins with numb fingers, whispering about a boy barely old enough to drive who was fighting for his life. Yet a sliver of doubt remained. 20 years in business had taught him that desperation could twist the truth into something almost believable. If Rico truly was sick, if Lena was truly sacrificing everything for him, then Nick needed to know. Not to catch her in another lie, but because the truth would determine what he did next. By the following afternoon, he had an address, information Noah Caldwell could find easily, though Nick Torres never could. The Martinez family lived in a worn-down apartment complex on Detroit's east side, where streetlights stayed broken for months and sirens were part of the night air. From his dented Honda Civic, he watched the entrance for an hour before she appeared. Maria Martinez, Rico's mother, stepped out carrying a worn work bag, dressed in scrubs, moving with the slow precision of someone who had long since burned through her reserves. She waited for the bus with her shoulders hunched against the cold. Her hands shook, not from winter's bite, but from the constant grind of too many hours and too little rest. Nick didn't approach her. Instead, he called Jake Morrison, a former Detroit cop who'd been his company's quiet problem solver for years. "I need a background check," Nick said. "Medical, financial, insurance. And I need it done so quietly that if anyone asks, this conversation never happened." The next morning, Jake's report landed on his desk, and every word sank like a weight in his chest. Rico Martinez, 15, diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia 8 months ago. Standard chemo had failed. His best chance was an experimental treatment costing $18,000 up front, plus $2,400 a month for 6 months. Insurance wouldn't touch it. Too new, too unproven. Maria worked 60 hours a week as a certified nursing assistant at 2 different facilities. There were no savings, no rich relatives, no credit line to bridge the chasm between survival and loss. 6 weeks earlier, she'd pawned a gold necklace, likely a family heirloom, for $180. Jake had included the ticket in his report. The date lined up exactly with what Lena had told him about covering a slow tip night. She wasn't just giving her own money. She was giving away things that couldn't be replaced. That evening at Murphy's, Nick watched her with new eyes. Rico was on shift, but the boy looked pale, moving slower than usual, sitting down twice during the dinner rush. Each time, Lena brushed past him, resting a hand on his shoulder, whispering something that brought a spark back to his eyes. "That boy's got heart," said Frank, a Tuesday regular, as Lena rang him up. "Reminds me of my grandson." "He sure does," Lena replied, her smile warm as she handed him his change. Frank left a $5 tip on a $12 meal. Nick noticed the way her eyes lit up, not for herself, but for what that extra $5 could mean for Rico. Over the next week, Nick saw the things he had missed before. Lena sliding a slice of pie to the homeless veteran with the excuse, "The kitchen messed this one up." Walking Sarah, the teenage hostess, to her car after every late shift. Quietly covering Tommy's lunch tab when the college kid admitted he was behind on textbook money. Calling 6 restaurants to help an elderly customer's grandson find work. Spending her own money to buy good coffee from next door when the diner's backup pot turned out sludge. But it was what he overheard in Dale's office that broke him. "I need more hours," Lena said. "Doubles, weekends, holidays, anything." "You're already working 50 a week," Dale replied. "When do you sleep?" "Sleep's overrated," she said lightly. "I just need the extra money." Dale's voice softened. "Everything okay at home? You're not in trouble, are you?" "Nothing like that. Just trying to get ahead." That night, when she left, Nick went to the old freezer with an envelope in hand, $400 in cash, exactly what she'd said she needed for Rico's next payment. Inside was a note written in plain, careful handwriting. "For Rico, from someone who believes in guardian angels." He slid it into the jar and walked away, feeling lighter than he had in years. The next evening, he arrived early. Lena stood by the freezer, holding his note, tears spilling down her cheeks. She scanned the room as if trying to spot the giver, then folded the paper and tucked it into her apron pocket, close to her heart. For the first time since he'd stepped into Murphy's Undercover, Nick smiled a real, unguarded smile. He'd found more than problems here. He'd found hope. A few days later, Lena came in early for her shift. Morning light crept through the diner's grimy windows as she moved through her opening routine, starting the coffee, checking freezer temps, scanning the previous night's notes. When she reached behind the old freezer for Rico's jar, she froze. On top of it sat a thick cream-colored envelope, her name written in elegant script. The paper was heavy, expensive, the kind no one at Murphy's would use. Hands trembling, she tore it open. Inside was a check for $30,000, made out in her name. The memo line read, "For Rico and all the others you help." Her knees buckled. She sat down on a milk crate and unfolded the letter that came with it. "Dear Lena, what you've been doing for Rico, for your co-workers, for every person who walks through these doors, is extraordinary. You've been changing lives with pocket change and kindness, asking for nothing in return except the chance to help. This is only the beginning. The world needs more people like you. Please come upstairs to the office above the diner when you receive this. There's someone who needs to meet you, someone who believes in guardian angels. She read it 3 times, her hands shaking so badly she could hardly keep hold of the paper. $30,000. Enough to cover every treatment, with money left over to lift the crushing weight off Maria's shoulders. It felt impossible, like something that only happened to other people in movies. The office above Murphy's had always been dark, a space she'd never seen used. Dale had mentioned it was for storage, but no one had ever gone up there. Now, clutching the check and the letter, she turned toward the narrow staircase she had passed 1,000 times, her heart pounding, her steps carrying her toward an answer she couldn't yet imagine. The door at the top of the narrow staircase was slightly ajar, a warm golden light spilling into the dim hallway. Lena hesitated for half a heartbeat before knocking softly. "Come in," a familiar voice called. Her pulse quickened. She pushed the door open and stepped into a room that was nothing like what she had pictured. Instead of a dusty storage space, she found herself in a sleek, modern office with polished wood floors, clean lines of designer furniture, and walls adorned with tasteful, expensive artwork. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Detroit skyline, the city still shimmering under the early morning light. Standing with his back to her, hands in his pockets, was Nick Torres, or at least the man she had known by that name, but this man was different. He wasn't wearing his dishwashing uniform or battered sneakers. He wore a tailored navy blazer over a crisp white shirt, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. His posture was no longer slouched from long nights over an industrial sink. It was straight, confident, commanding. "Nick," she said, her voice small with confusion. I don't understand. What is this place?" He turned, and in that moment she realized she was looking at a stranger. The weariness she'd seen in his eyes was gone, replaced by a steady focus. Even his hair was styled differently. "My name isn't Nick Torres," he said quietly. "It's Noah Caldwell. I own Murphy's Diner and 47 other restaurants just like it." The floor seemed to tilt beneath her. She gripped the doorframe to steady herself. You're the owner?" He nodded, and she could see the weight of regret in his expression. "I came here undercover because this location was failing. I wanted to understand the problems from the ground up. Instead, I spent 3 weeks watching the most extraordinary person I've ever met save a child's life with tip money, and I suspected her of theft." His admission hung in the air, heavy as the winter outside. A dozen emotions surged through Lena: shock, betrayal, disbelief, and a deep ache that the man she had trusted had been lying to her from the start. "You thought I was stealing," she said, her voice trembling. "I did," Noah admitted. "I saw you with the jar, noticed money missing from the register, and I assumed the worst. I was ready to fire you. I was ready to call you a thief and send you out into the cold." Tears welled in her eyes, though she couldn't tell if they came from relief, hurt, or simply the crushing weight of the truth. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I was wrong. About you, about this place, about what matters." He crossed to his desk and picked up a folder. "In 3 weeks, you taught me more about leadership and compassion than I learned in 20 years of business school and boardrooms." He extended the folder toward her. "I want to offer you a job, Director of Community Initiatives for the Caldwell Restaurant Group. You'd travel to our locations, set up employee assistance programs, create support networks for workers facing crises like Rico's family. You'd have a budget, a team, and the authority to help people the way you've been helping them here." Lena stared at the folder like it was something fragile. "I don't have a college degree. I've never managed anything bigger than a dinner rush." "You've been managing miracles," Noah said softly. "You've been turning a failing diner into a place where people take care of each other. They don't teach that in business school." Through the windows, Murphy's Diner looked small, almost ordinary. But Lena knew better now. Ordinary places could hold extraordinary stories, and ordinary people could change lives. She glanced at the check still clutched in her hand. Rico's treatment. Fully covered, Noah assured her. And if this one doesn't work, we'll find another. Whatever it takes. She looked at him then, not as Nick Torres the dishwasher, but as Noah Caldwell, a man who had chosen to be better than he'd been before. She reached for the folder. 1 year later, Lena Martinez stood before 200 employees in a grand Chicago hotel ballroom. Behind her, an enormous mosaic glimmered, thousands of pennies, nickels, dimes, and quarters arranged into a stunning artwork. At the center, spelled in silver dollars, were the words, "The tip jar that saved us." When I started collecting coins in a mason jar behind an old freezer, Lena began, her voice warm and steady. I thought I was just trying to save one boy's life. I never imagined that small act of hope would grow into something that could change how we take care of each other. In the back row, Noah watched with pride. Over the past year, Lena had visited 43 of his restaurants, establishing programs that had helped employees through medical emergencies, housing crises, and family hardships. Turnover had dropped 60%. Customer satisfaction was at an all-time high. In break rooms across the chain, tip jars, no longer for servers but for staff in need, had begun to appear on their own. "Rico Martinez is here with us today," Lena said, smiling toward the front row. Rico stood, healthy and bright-eyed, his cheeks full of color. He's cancer-free. He's graduating high school this spring, and he plans to study social work so he can help families like his own. The applause was thunderous. But Rico's story is just one, Lena continued when the room quieted. This year, we've helped Maria Santos get her daughter into rehab. We kept the Johansson family from losing their home after an accident. We provided emergency child care for single parents, covered funeral costs for those who couldn't afford them, and funded scholarships for employees' kids who thought college was out of reach. She looked out at the room. Dishwashers, cooks, servers, managers, people who made life better for strangers every day. None of this happened because of one person's generosity. It happened because all of you decided that taking care of each other mattered more than anything else. Later that night, Noah found her packing up her notes. "You've built something incredible," he said. "We built something incredible," she corrected gently. "I just carried the first jar." 3 hours later, Noah stood outside Murphy's Diner. The place looked brighter now, inside and out. Through the window, the evening shift was winding down, the new manager helping close, the staff moving with quiet teamwork. Then he saw her, a young waitress named Jenna, new to the job, standing behind the old freezer. In her hands was a mason jar, and she was slipping in a few folded bills. When Noah stepped inside, Jenna flushed. "It's for a scholarship fund," she explained. "For employees' kids." Lena would have wanted it that way. Noah smiled, feeling a lump in his throat. She'd be proud. "She says kindness is like cooking," Jenna added. "It gets better when you share the recipe." As Noah walked back to his car, he thought of jars and coins, of how extraordinary change always began with something small. Behind him, Murphy's Diner glowed in the dark, a beacon disguised as a simple restaurant. Somewhere in another city, Lena was already preparing for her next stop, her next chance to prove that caring for each other wasn't just good business. It was the only thing that truly mattered. And in a mason jar behind an old freezer, the coins kept clinking, carrying dreams closer to reality, one tip at a time.